morning, everybody. It is Monday, June 22nd, and that means it's time for another episode of Chatting with Agnes and Cecilia. I'm one of your co-hosts, Cecilia Supp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips. We're a consulting consortium that provides services to all 501c organizations. I'm here today with my friend and co-host, Agnes. Hello, Agnes, and would you like to greet our audience?
Sure. Thank you, Cecilia. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our global audience, wherever you're operating from. My name is Agnes Amos Coleman. I'm an author and a consultant. Over to you, Cecilia.
Great. Thank you, Agnes. And today we're really excited. We have a longtime colleague and friend of mine, Ed Barks, joining us today. Ed is president of Barks Communication. He's a communication specialist and author. And today we're going to be discussing not just A+ communications for the C-suite, but we're going to hear a little bit about his upcoming book that's coming out July 7th. So welcome, Ed. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about A+ communications?
Yeah, thanks, Cecilia. It's great to be here with you and Agnes this morning. And thanks for the mention of the book, A+ Strategies for C-Suite Communications, Turning Today's Leaders into Tomorrow's Influencers. And really what it's about is a guide, if you will, for communications and government relations executives who have the responsibility for counseling their C-suite. Oftentimes it's difficult for those disciplines to get the attention that they deserve and more importantly that their company or their association needs in order to achieve their public policy and their communications goals. So I wrote the book with those senior communications and public affairs executives in mind, the ones who are directly going into the C-suite and advising them with regard to those types of issues.
So Ed, what do you think is the most important thing to tell somebody in the C-suite when they're talking to people outside the organization?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that really seems to resonate and when people hear it, and that is the notion of sustained professional development. Now, a lot of times I will go into a client and do, for example, a media training workshop. Mm-hmm. And many clients think, well, okay, you know, we're done with that for now. We can put that off for another year, 2 years. In some cases, I've actually had individuals say they haven't had a refresher in 6 years, which is a little scary for a company or an association. However, it's that notion of continuing to get better over time. It's not that one workshop is going to do it for you. It needs to be an ongoing menu of services that executives can use both with their internal staff and with their external consultants.
That is such great advice, and I'm glad you brought that up because we have to practice to be better at things. And I know Agnes and I are both huge supporters of professional development, especially the ongoing. So here's another question for you, because this is something that's important to me as a public speaker. What are your views on extemporaneous speaking? And do you ever counsel people on that?
Yeah, let me define the term, and I know you know what it means. Let me define it for everybody else out there. Extemporaneous can be fine. That is when you have prepared remarks in your mind, you know what you're going to say, you simply don't have them written down anywhere. That sometimes gets confused with impromptu, which is also called winging it, which is something you should never do. That's where you start digging that very deep hole that you're going to have a hard time climbing out of. So you could speak extemporaneously, you could speak with a full text, you could speak with notes, you could speak with slides, though I will say be judicious when you use slides, don't always default to that. So there are a number of options, and it really depends on what the individual speaker is most comfortable with and what best fits that audience.
That's great. I'm glad you did define that because I do think of extemporaneous speaking a little bit differently because to me it means you're always ready. You're always prepared to speak. And so that's kind of my definition of it, because if you can't answer the question, and I think Ed and Agnes will both back me up on this, just say, I don't know. I will get back to you. Don't make something up. So Agnes,
that's a good response, and I would also advise to add something at the end of that. I don't know. What I can tell you is, and then you bridge right to your message. So it's as you said, Cecilia, it's having that extemporaneous notion that you know what you want to say. You have that message internalized so that you can verbalize it.
And you're always ready with it. And that takes practice, like Ed said. So Agnes, did you have any questions for Ed or comments?
I think for me, it's just taking a different view of this dialogue. It's really looking at the overarching goal of the communication itself, whether it's whether it's the C-suite that's communicating or anyone for that matter, but so much so for C-suite actually, where accountability to their stakeholders come into play in this, and transparency, because that's one of the challenges that C-suite have been, have been kind of, these are some of the areas of challenges that's been seen when C-suites are communicating. The audience are not receiving that accountability and transparency, and I see an opportunity here for them to improve on that.
Yeah, that's
Right.
great. It's great insight. So, Ed, what other gems of information are in your book on A+ communications?
Well, it really covers a range of issues with respect to communications and public affairs. For example, there's a chapter in there on messaging, which a lot of organizations simply don't pay enough attention to. I always ask when I go into an engagement with a client, give me your messages, send them to me in writing. And I tend to get a number of different responses to that. One is, here you go. And the messages are absolutely elegant. It's one page. It's 4 main message points backed up by facts, which will support it. The other reaction I'll get is something like, okay, sure. And I get this 5-page laundry list of bullet points, which good luck getting somebody to internalize that. And I will say about the most common reaction I get is, huh? In writing? You want those in writing? So the messaging is really important. So that's one piece that we delve into in A+ strategies for C-suite communications. Also, we talk about reputational risk. We talk about media relations, about public speaking. So it's a broad scope of how those senior communications and public affairs executives can advise the C-suite.
And so what I like to say to people when I talk about public speaking is there's always a certain level of risk when you're speaking publicly, because when you're sharing your message. So how does the risk differ, or in your mind, does it differ between the C-suite and, let's say, a director of communications?
It really depends on the audience. The C-suite you typically want to say for the heavy hitters, for those really important interviews, for those really important journalists and media outlets that you're going to talk to, for those really essential audiences that need to hear at a very top level what your company's business and public policy goals are all about and how you intend to achieve them. And importantly, how you can give a call to action to that audience or through that reporter to helping them help you achieve those goals. So, the C-suite is going to talk to a higher level audience, managers, supervisors. They may be in a more informal type of exchange, a business exchange, but informal to some degree nonetheless. So the audiences are going to differ, and that's where a lot of the attention has to go first and foremost is, who are you talking to? What do they need to hear from you? And what do you want to urge them to do as that call to action?
And that's great advice. And it makes me wonder, what advice do you have if somebody fumbles when they're speaking? Either they're at a press conference or they're talking one-on-one with a reporter, or maybe they're just talking to a group of stakeholders. We all do it. We say the wrong thing. We slip up. We misspeak. What kind of advice do you have for people if they do kind of fumble it?
First of all, most audiences and most reporters are going to understand that you're just going to have those moments. Your tongue gets twisted, your mind goes blank for a moment or two. Those things are going to happen. So it's a matter of simply stepping back, being human to a degree, and just stopping, starting over again if need be, or reminding yourself of how you can get back on track with respect to again keeping that message foremost in your mind that you want to deliver.
Well, and Agnes, before we move on to our next topic with Ed, did you have any comments or questions?
Sure. The other comment that I like to make is that setting the tone for the organization if you're within the C-suite audience, because, as you know, the C-suites are usually the ones that drive the agenda and the focus and the strategy for the organization, and making sure that the right tone is set for the right audience that they, that's there that they're dialoguing with, pretty much.
Great. Thanks, Agnes. Now, Ed, we have a few minutes left in today's episode, and we love teasing authors' new books. Agnes is also an author, published author. I aspire to be one someday. So you have a new book coming out on July 7th, and
Yes.
we'd love to hear whatever it is you can share about it today.
Well, this book is going to focus on media relations. And I've got to admit, this is not the book I had envisioned writing next. I had planned to do some, just in the initial stages of doing the research for the book that I did have planned to publish later this year. However, when the coronavirus pandemic hit, everybody started panicking, and it proved very difficult to get interviews with the experts that I needed to talk to, even for 20, 30 minutes on the phone. Everybody was scrambling. Nobody seemed to have the organizational ability to do that. So I needed to shift if I wanted to continue with the book process. So I decided to go to a shorter volume that didn't take as much original research. A lot of it was just, from up here and 20 plus years of experience as a media relations and communications consultant. So I flipped the script, and the book is going to be focusing on media relations, about how spokespeople and the media relations experts within a company or an association can execute a media relations plan. It's one thing that I have done over the course of the past couple of months since the pandemic hit was on my website at barkscom.com to offer a range of free resources, essentially opening the vault to a lot of stuff that I've written over the 20 plus years. So my thought was this book the ebook version of the new book is going to be among those resources. So it will be available on a complimentary basis to those who come through either my website or my blog at the C-Suite Blueprint blog, my Twitter feed at twitter.com/edbarks. So, there would be a number of ways to get it for free. Unfortunately, I cannot put it on a certain well-known bookseller because it will be up there, but there will be a price attached to it. Because they're there to make money. They don't offer things for free. I'm willing to do that and to go the extra mile to get it in the hands of people who need it during this critical time.
Well, in our last few minutes, Ed, you have this new book coming out. And first of all, thank you for being so generous, sharing that with all of us. So if somebody took away just one or two points from your upcoming book, what might those be?
Well, again, it comes down to something we've already talked about, and that's sustained professional development. It's continuing to use a hackneyed phrase, sharpen that saw over time. And this book really zeroes in on the media piece of that. So it gives the essence of how you can prepare for an interview, how you can perform in a media interview. And in fact, in a big portion of the book involves 100 plus hot media tips. So it's everything from, how do you prepare for that interview? What do you do if a reporter catches up to you unexpectedly? What do you do for TV interviews, for radio interviews, for podcast interviews? How can you prepare and how can you perform at a maximum level? So that's what the book is all about.
Wow, that sounds like a great book. Before we start wrapping up today, Agnes, did you have any closing thoughts or comments?
Sure. I was just going to ask you, Ed, who are your target audience for this book? Is this just our association community, or those who are in the for-profit world can also benefit from this?
It really is both. Most of my clientele is directly with the companies who would be members of an association. I do have a fair component of association clientele as well. So it's for those associations and those member companies within a trade association, for example, and those senior executives in the communications and government relations fields.
And it sounds like a great book for everybody right now as we're continuing to crawl out of the after effects of the pandemic.
Well, it's that, and it's also I think helpful for these times because we're not going to be out of this anytime soon. It's not going to be the flip of a switch, and all of a sudden we're back to where we were 6 months ago.
Exactly.
So there are pieces in there that will focus very clearly on how can you manage, for instance, an interview like this over Zoom.
Well, and that's why I use the word crawl, Ed, because it's going to be a long process, because I agree 100%. And it's going to be a lot of shifting and remessaging maybe, or continuing the messaging that went on during the pandemic if you had some good messaging. I've seen a lot of people pull together. I've seen a lot of people be as positive as possible in such a uncertain time. So it's great that you are out there and you're sharing your 20 plus years of knowledge on this topic. And thank you so much for being with us today. You've mentioned your website. You've mentioned your A+ communications for C-suite communications.
It's actually A+ strategies for C-suite communications. As an author, it's like my baby, so I can't.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I called your baby the wrong name. I totally understand. So Ed, if you could share the name of the book one more time, your website one more time, and the best way to get in touch with you.
Sure. My latest book is A+ Strategies for C-Suite Communications, Turning Today's Leaders into Tomorrow's Influencers. The title for the new book has not yet been revealed. That there's a surprise coming. So I'll tease that. My first book, by the way, which I'll also mention fits in here, is The Truth About Public Speaking, The 3 Keys to Great Presentations. So obviously that one focuses much more on a much more concentrated basis on public speaking. In terms of getting in touch, website works great, www.barkscom.com, and that's spelled BARKSCOMM.com. I'm on Twitter at Ed Barks, that's EDBARKS, and you can also see me weekly on my C-Suite Blueprint blog.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ed. And we definitely have to have you back after your next book comes out and talk about media relations. That's so important in the 21st century with we have traditional media, we have non-traditional media, which is now, I guess social media is really more traditional now. So we definitely have to have you back to discuss that. That's very exciting. We all have to go rogue for now. Thanks again to Ed. Always thanks to my friend Agnes for being here today. And we will see you next week. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips, you can check us out at www.roguetulips.com. And we are supporters of the 501c League, which is a virtual membership organization for everyone in the 501c community and the people who love them. And you can check them out at the 501cleague.net. So on behalf of myself and Agnes and Ed, thanks everybody. And as Agnes and I like to say, take 15 minutes and talk to somebody because you might learn something. Bye for now.